Everybody thought the score would be the story. It wasn't. The real story started long before Team USA crushed Italy, and it had almost nothing to do with the final margin. For days, the internet had been doing what it does best. Taking a few seconds of footage, stretching it into a full-blown drama, and convincing people they were watching a team on the edge of falling apart. Suddenly, every glance meant something. Every missed high-five became proof. Every substitution turned into another excuse to push the idea that Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese could not coexist, that Paige Buchers would somehow get lost in the middle of it, and that this entire young core was too hyped, too complicated, and too divided to actually work when it mattered. And that is exactly why this game felt bigger than a normal win from the start. It wasn't just about beating Italy. It was about whether all that noise had any truth behind it. Because once a narrative like that catches fire, people stop watching the game honestly. They stop looking at spacing, timing, effort, and chemistry, and they start watching like detectives. They hunt for tension. They look for cold body language. They search for tiny signs that confirm what they already want to believe. And when enough people repeat the same thing online, even weak theories start sounding real. That was the cloud hanging over this team coming in. Not just pressure to win, but pressure to prove they were not the mess people wanted them to be. And that kind of pressure hits differently when the roster is full of stars. Because stars are never allowed to just be talented. People always need more. They want rivalry. They want jealousy. They want drama behind the scenes. They want the kind of story they can argue about all week. And when you put names like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Paige Buchers on the same team, the spotlight gets even harsher. Every move gets judged twice. Once for basketball, and once for the story people are trying to build around it. What made this even more interesting was how fast the conversation shifted after the Puerto Rico game. A tiny moment turned into a giant talking point. Suddenly, people were speaking with total confidence about locker room tension they could not possibly measure. Commentators started acting like they had uncovered some hidden fracture inside Team USA. Fans picked sides. Clips spread everywhere. And the weirdest part was how quickly basketball became secondary. It was no longer about how these players fit, what roles they were learning, or how a team grows under pressure. It became a social media trial built on body language and assumptions. That is why the Italy game mattered so much. Italy was not some throwaway opponent. They were physical enough, disciplined enough, and organized enough to make Team USA answer real questions. If there truly was bad chemistry, if there really was resentment, hesitation, or confusion under the surface, a game like this had the perfect chance to expose it. Good teams can smell uncertainty. Experienced teams know how to lean on it. And for a little while, it looked like that might actually happen. Because the opening stretch was not smooth. It did not look like a team ready to silence everybody in 5 minutes. The energy felt uneven. The offense looked tight. The rhythm was off. There was just enough hesitation to make people wonder whether the pressure had followed them onto the floor. And you could almost feel the online crowd getting ready. One bad quarter and the hot takes would explode again. One awkward sequence and the same people would be posting clips before the possession even ended. But that is what makes what happened next so important. This was not one of those games where Team USA walked in dominant from the opening tip and gave people no room to talk. This game actually gave the doubters a window. For a moment, the critics had something to point at. For a moment, the drama crowd could convince themselves the tension was real. And that made the turnaround hit even harder, because once the momentum changed, it did not just change the scoreboard. It exposed how weak the whole narrative really was. For a few minutes, it looked like the pressure might actually get to them. That was the part nobody talks about when they only post the final score. A blowout always looks clean after the fact. It looks inevitable. It makes people act like Team USA walked in, flipped a switch, and erased Italy without breaking a sweat. But that is not how this started. Early on, the game felt tense. The offense was sticky. The movement was slower than expected. Possessions had that strange pause in them where players seem to be thinking half a second too long, and at this level, half a second is enough to make everything feel off. Italy noticed it too. You could see it in the way they defended. They were physical, compact, and patient. They were not panicking. They were not overreacting to the star power across from them. They looked like a team that came in expecting noise around Team USA and believing that if they stayed organized long enough, the Americans might start pressing. And that is what made those early minutes feel dangerous. Not because Team USA was playing horribly, but because they were playing just cautiously enough to leave room for doubt. That is always how these storylines get fed. It is never one giant collapse at first. It is little things. A delayed read. A crowded possession. A drive that ends without a clean finish. A player hesitating instead of attacking. The scoreboard stays close, the favorite does not look comfortable, and suddenly everybody watching starts projecting bigger meaning onto ordinary mistakes. Every sloppy sequence starts getting treated like evidence. The internet loves that moment, because it feels like confirmation. It feels like the "I told you so" phase beginning in real time. And honestly, if you were one of the people coming into this game skeptical, the opening gave you enough to work with. Team USA did not come out flying. They did not look like a machine right away. There was a stiffness to the pace. The ball did not hum from side to side. The energy did not fully pop. It looked more like a group trying not to make mistakes than a group trying to impose itself. That is a huge difference, especially in a game where the whole world is already watching for cracks. What made it worse was that Italy was disciplined enough to keep the pressure on without doing anything reckless. They made the Americans earn everything. They crowded lanes. They stayed alert enough to avoid giving away easy momentum. They forced Team USA to operate in traffic, and for a little while, that traffic slowed everything down. It created exactly the kind of ugly opening that lets outside noise creep into the building. You could almost imagine the reaction online in real time. Same old problem. Too many stars. Not enough chemistry. Too much hype. Not enough flow. That is why the next shift mattered so much. Because when a team is under this kind of spotlight, there is a difference between settling in and taking over. Settling in is gradual. It is cautious. It is a team trying to calm itself down. Taking over is when one player changes the emotional temperature of the game. And that is what happened here. The moment did not feel subtle. It felt like someone finally got tired of the hesitation and decided the game needed force. That is where Caitlyn changed everything. It was not just that she entered. It was how the game felt once she did. The tempo sharpened. The floor seemed to open up. The hesitation that had been hanging over the offense started disappearing because she does not play like someone waiting to see what happens. She plays like someone trying to make something happen immediately. That kind of pressure is contagious. One aggressive touch can change the entire mood of a unit. One downhill attack can wake everybody up. And that is exactly what Team USA looked like. A team waking up all at once. What stood out was how fast the uncertainty started fading. Suddenly the defense was reacting instead of sitting comfortably. Suddenly Italy was the team backpedaling. Suddenly possessions had purpose. Instead of drifting into crowded spots, Team USA started bending the floor. Instead of letting the game stay muddy, they started forcing it into motion. And once that happened, all the nervous energy from the opening stretch started flipping the other way. You could feel the crowd catch it. You could feel the team catch it too. That is the thing critics miss when they obsess over chemistry clips. Real chemistry does not always announce itself with smiles and celebrations first. Sometimes it shows up as pace, as trust in the next read, as players moving like they know someone is going to reward the cut, the screen, the sprint, the extra effort. And the second Team USA started playing faster and freer, the entire story of the night changed. Not because the rumors were instantly erased, but because the game was finally forcing everyone to watch the basketball again. And once that happened, the drama started losing its grip. The body language detectives had less to work with. The overanalyzing got harder. Because now there was something much more obvious on screen. A team beginning to find its edge, and a star guard beginning to drag the whole energy of the game in a completely different direction. The scary part for Italy was that this shift did not even feel like Team USA at full speed yet. It felt like the first warning. The first sign that the safe version of this game was over. The first crack in the dam. And once that crack appeared, everything that had looked shaky in the opening minutes started turning into something far more dangerous. Because Caitlyn's entrance did not just change the pace. It revealed what this team looks like when somebody stops playing careful and starts playing fearless. The biggest difference was not the box score. It was the attitude. Caitlyn did not come into that game looking like someone easing her way into the flow. She came in looking like she had already decided the hesitation phase was over. From her first real touch, there was a different kind of force behind everything she did. Not reckless, not rushed, just aggressive in a way that immediately changed the geometry of the floor. Italy had been able to sit on actions early because Team USA was letting the game come to them. Caitlyn flipped that. She started making the defense react before it was ready, and once a defense loses that comfort, everything gets harder. You could see it first in the way she attacked downhill. That mattered because one of the quiet conversations around her lately had been whether that burst still looked the same every night. People had been talking about rhythm, about whether she had become too perimeter heavy, about whether the most dangerous version of her was still there. Those conversations always get louder when a player is under a microscope. And with Caitlyn, every stretch becomes a referendum. If she shoots, people ask why she did not drive. If she passes, people ask why she was not more assertive. If she starts slow, people act like it confirms some bigger decline. That is the burden that comes with being watched this closely. But against Italy, once she settled into those possessions, the hesitation disappeared. She was not floating around the arc waiting for perfect conditions. She was getting into the defense. She was putting pressure on the paint. She was forcing help to show itself. And that changes everything for a team like Team USA, because the second a defense has to collapse, the rest of the floor starts opening in layers. Shooters get cleaner looks. Cutters have more room. Bigs can rim run with confidence instead of standing in traffic. One player's aggression becomes everybody else's oxygen. That was the real shift. She did not just bring energy. She brought direction. There is a huge difference between playing fast and playing with purpose. A lot of teams can speed up for a few possessions. That does not mean they are controlling anything. Caitlyn was controlling something. She was changing where the defense had to look and how quickly it had to decide. Suddenly, Italy was no longer guarding a static offense. They were guarding pressure. And pressure makes disciplined teams look less disciplined. It makes smart defenders take a wrong step. It makes help come a beat too early or too late. It makes everything feel rushed, even when the offense looks calm. And that is what made her stretch so important. It was not just highlight stuff. It was emotional leverage. Every drive, every sharp decision, every quick read made Team USA look less like a team burdened by outside noise and more like a team remembering exactly how dangerous it could be. That kind of change is hard to fake. You either have that conviction or you do not. And in this game, Caitlyn looked like she had made up her mind that the only way through the noise was to attack right through it. That confidence affects teammates too, even when she is not the one scoring. When a lead guard starts playing with that kind of certainty, everyone around her relaxes in a different way. Wings run harder because they believe the pass is coming. Screeners hit with more purpose because they know the action matters. Rebounders start looking up the floor sooner because transition suddenly feels alive again. It creates a chain reaction. And that is why the mood of the game kept shifting once she settled in. Team USA stopped looking like a group trying to avoid mistakes and started looking like a group trying to punish them. What makes Caitlyn especially dangerous in that kind of rhythm is that the defense never gets one clean answer. If they shade too high, she can split it. If they retreat, she can pull from deep. If they help late, she sees the angle before most players even recognize it. That is where her presence becomes exhausting. A defense can survive talent for a while. What it struggles to survive is constant decision-making under pressure. And that is what she was creating possession after possession. Italy was not just being challenged physically. They were being forced to think too fast. That is usually where the game starts slipping. Because once defenders stop trusting their own reads, everything gets messy. Rotations get longer. Closeouts get sloppier. Help defense starts arriving with doubt in it. And once that happens against a player who thrives on chaos, the game starts opening exactly the way she wants. That was the feeling building during this stretch. You could sense the control changing hands. Italy was still competing, still fighting, still trying to hold shape, but the edge of the game had shifted. Team USA was no longer searching for rhythm. It was starting to dictate it. And here's what made this even more interesting. For all the attention on the supposed off-court tension, the first real proof that the storyline was falling apart did not come from some dramatic celebration or obvious camera moment. It came from basketball instinct. From the speed of recognition between players. From actions that only work when trust shows up before the pass even leaves someone's hand. That is what people miss when they talk about chemistry like it is just about smiling on the bench. Real chemistry reveals itself in anticipation. In a rebounder already knowing where the guard will be. In a cutter moving before the defense turns its head. In a screener making contact at exactly the right time because she knows the ball handler is about to punish the angle. Those are not things you manufacture for cameras. Those are things that happen when players are actually connected in the moment. And that is why the next sequence mattered more than any quote could have. Because once Caitlyn had changed the tempo, the game finally gave everyone a chance to see whether this bad chemistry narrative could survive real possessions. Not theories. Not freeze frames. Not clips slowed down to create drama. Real basketball, at full speed, under pressure. And the answer came fast. The play that really blew the whole thing open was not even about the finish. It was about the read. Angel Reese came down with a rebound in traffic, and right there, in that split second after securing the ball, you could see something the internet drama never accounts for. She was not looking confused. She was not freezing up. She was not acting like someone unsure of who to trust. She grabbed it, turned, and immediately looked up the floor for Caitlin. That matters. In games like this, those instinctive choices tell the truth a lot faster than any post-game quote ever will. Players do not fake that kind of reaction. They either trust the next action or they do not. Angel trusted it instantly. She fired the outlet, Caitlin took it up, and within seconds the whole floor started tilting. That sequence moved with the kind of timing that only works when both players are already thinking one step ahead. Caitlin did not bring it over slowly and wait for the defense to settle. She read the floor as it was forming. Angel did not trail casually or drift into space. She rolled hard, like she knew the window was going to be there if she hit it on time. And then came the pass. Straight through the defense, right into the lane Angel was attacking, with the kind of precision that makes a play look simple when it absolutely is not. The shot did not fall. And honestly, that almost made the moment better. Because if the layup drops, people only remember the highlight. Since it missed, you are forced to look at what actually mattered. The timing. The trust. The fact that the idea was there before the defense could even fully react. That one possession said more than an entire week of online speculation. You do not make that read to a teammate you are supposedly disconnected from. You do not sprint into that lane and expect the ball if there is tension strong enough to affect play. That is not how basketball works at this level. Trust shows up early, or the possession dies. Here, it was alive the entire way. And that was only the start. A few trips later, Angel came up and planted a screen that changed everything again. This is where her role gets overlooked by people who only watch for headlines. Everyone knows she brings energy. Everyone talks about the rebounds, the emotion, the physicality. But in a lineup like this, the details matter more. One hard screen at the right moment can break a possession wide open, especially when the guard using it only needs a sliver of daylight. Angel hit that screen with force, Caitlin used it perfectly, and suddenly there was just enough space. That was all it took. One clean separation, one quick rise, and the three was gone before Italy could recover. That moment hit differently because it was impossible to misread. There was no awkwardness in it. No visible strain. No hesitation after the play. They found each other right away, celebrated it, and moved on like teammates who expected that kind of success. Not like two people trying to survive each other. Not like stars locked in some hidden rivalry. Just teammates making a play, recognizing it, and getting ready for the next one. That is what made all the noise from the previous week start to feel ridiculous in real time. The more the game unfolded, the less believable the tension narrative became. And it was not only Caitlin and Angel. That is what made this section of the game so damaging to the hot takes. The ball was moving too cleanly. The reads were too natural. The possessions had too much flow. You could watch the group starting to sync up in ways that are hard to fake even for a quarter, let alone across multiple stretches. The energy no longer looked fragile. It looked connected. The passes were on time. The cuts were purposeful. Players were rewarding each other for effort instead of hunting their own moments. Once that starts happening, the whole story changes. This is the part casual viewers often miss. Chemistry is not always loud. Sometimes it is loud, sure. Sometimes it is obvious in a celebration or a huge bench reaction. But a lot of the time it lives in the boring-looking things that actually decide games. A player setting a real screen instead of slipping out early. A rebound immediately turned into a transition trigger. A guard trusting the roller before the lane opens all the way. A star giving the ball up early because she knows it will come back better. Those things do not make drama clips. They make winning basketball. That is why this stretch mattered so much more than the scoreboard did. The scoreboard was just the proof. The real story was that the actions themselves kept exposing the weakness of the whole controversy. Every clean read made the rumors look smaller. Every extra pass made the internet detectives look sillier. Every sign of real on-court trust made that earlier clip from Puerto Rico feel more and more meaningless. And once viewers started noticing that, the mood around the game changed. People were no longer watching for what might go wrong. They were starting to watch for how dangerous this could get if the group kept clicking. That is when Paige's presence became even more important. Because once Caitlin had sped the game up and Angel had helped turn those possessions into real pressure, another problem started forming for Italy. It was one thing to deal with pace and force. It was another thing entirely to deal with poise. And that is exactly what Paige brought into the picture. She did not need chaos to make an impact. She could punish you in the calm moments too. She could let a possession breathe, wait for one wrong step, and make you pay without ever looking rushed. That is what made the lineup start to feel unfair. Caitlin gave it pressure. Angel gave it edge. And Paige was about to give it control. That is where Italy's real nightmare began. Up to that point, they were already dealing with a game that had started slipping away from their preferred pace. Caitlin had injected urgency into everything. Angel had made the physical side of the game feel heavier. But when Paige settled into the action, the entire shape of the threat changed again. And that is what makes a lineup like this so difficult to handle. It is not just one style coming at you over and over. It is wave after wave of different pressure. First speed, then force. Then this calm, surgical control that somehow feels even more dangerous because it never looks rushed. Paige has that effect on games. Some players dominate by overwhelming you. Paige does it by making everything look under control, even when the defense is scrambling. That is why people keep describing her as smooth. But even that word almost undersells it. Smooth sounds passive. What she does is more exact than that. She plays with a kind of quiet authority. She does not need 10 frantic moves to create space. She does not need to look like she is playing at full speed for the defense to realize it is already in trouble. One hesitation, one angle change, one balanced pull-up, and suddenly the possession belongs to her. That style was brutal for Italy at that stage of the game. Because once a defense has already been sped up by Caitlin, the last thing it wants is a player like Paige stepping in and punishing every rushed reaction. Defenders start leaning too hard one way because they are afraid of getting beat off the dribble. They start over-closing because they know Team USA has shooters. They start guessing. And Paige is one of those players who lives off that exact moment. She sees the defender's weight shift, sees the extra half step, and turns it into a clean look without wasting motion. That is what made her possessions stand out so much. They did not feel wild. They felt inevitable. And that can be demoralizing in a different way. A fast break bucket hurts because it feels explosive. A physical rebound and putback hurt because they wear you down. But a cold, controlled bucket from a player who never looks hurried does something else. It makes the defense feel like it has no answer even when it is technically in position. That is the Paige effect. She can make a possession look normal right up until the moment the shot is gone and the net snaps. Then you replay it in your head and realize she had you off balance almost the entire time without ever forcing the issue. That is what started happening to Italy. They were no longer only dealing with whether they could contain the first action. Now they had to survive the second and third layers too. If Caitlin pushed pace and bent the floor, Paige could walk into the space that opened up and finish the possession with total control. If the defense recovered hard to the perimeter, Paige had the footwork and patience to beat that closeout. If a possession slowed down, she did not need chaos to bail her out. She could create in the half-court, get to a comfortable spot, and punish a defender who was already mentally overloaded from everything else Team USA was threatening. That is when the trio started to look like more than just a fun idea. Because talent is easy to spot. Everybody already knew these names. The bigger question was always whether the skills would actually fit together when the game got real. And this stretch gave a pretty loud answer. Caitlin was not canceling Paige out by having the ball. Paige was not shrinking because other stars were on the floor. Angel was not being turned into a background player. They were each making the others harder to guard. That is the part people underestimate when they get stuck in rivalry talk. Fit matters more than noise. And when the fit is real, the defense feels it before the audience fully catches up. You could start to see Italy reaching that point. Their coverages looked a little more strained. Their recoveries had a little more panic in them. Even when they got through one action, another problem was waiting. That is exhausting over 4 quarters. It is not just about getting scored on. It is about being forced to defend different kinds of threats without ever fully resetting. One possession asks for physicality. The next asks for speed. The next asks for perfect discipline against a player who can score in rhythm without giving you anything messy to attack. That is a brutal cycle, and Team USA was starting to trap Italy inside it. What made Paige's presence even more valuable was that she brought balance to the whole thing. Caitlin can bend a game until it feels like it is moving downhill at all times. Angel can make possessions feel violent in the best possible way. Paige gives that kind of lineup a center of gravity. She keeps it from becoming too chaotic. She gives it those composed, clean scoring moments that punish a defense for overreacting to everything else. In other words, she makes the dangerous parts sustainable. She lets the group stay sharp without having to live entirely on emotion or momentum. That is when this stopped feeling like a one-game flash. Because once you see those pieces working together, you stop thinking only about the final score. You start thinking bigger. You start asking the question fans always ask when a lineup suddenly clicks. Was this just a good night, or was this a preview? Was this only a response to internet drama, or was this actually the beginning of something much larger? That is the kind of thought a game like this creates when the fit looks real enough. It moves the conversation away from gossip and back toward ceiling. And the ceiling here looked ridiculous. If Caitlyn had the defense scrambling, and Angel was punishing it physically, and Paige was calmly taking whatever openings were left behind, then Italy was not facing one problem. They were facing a chain reaction. Stop one thing, something else opens. Shade one player, another one gets cleaner space. Try to slow the tempo, and now you are defending patience and shot-making. Try to press up too hard, and the floor opens again. That is what makes certain groups so dangerous. They do not just beat you with talent. They make every answer feel incomplete. That was the bigger message hidden inside this stretch. The story was never really about whether these stars could share a court. The story was whether their strengths could amplify each other. Against Italy, the answer kept looking more obvious with every possession. And once that became clear, the conversation naturally started shifting to something even more interesting than the rumor cycle. What if this was not just a response? What if this was the blueprint? That is when one game started feeling a lot bigger than one game. A dominant win is one thing. A dominant win that suddenly makes people rethink the future is something else entirely. That was the feeling building as this one kept unfolding. The scoreboard was already turning into a statement, but the more interesting part was what people were starting to imagine while watching it happen. Because once you see Caitlyn, Angel, and Paige affect the same game in different ways without stepping on each other, your mind automatically jumps ahead. You stop asking whether they can coexist and start asking how far this could actually go. That is a very different conversation. And honestly, it is the conversation Team USA fans had been waiting to have. Not the fake body language debates. Not the endless clip dissection. The real basketball question. What does this team look like when the younger core gets real floor time together, real responsibility together, and real freedom to shape the identity of the game? For a while, that had mostly lived in people's imagination. Fans talked about it. They argued about rotations. They wondered whether the staff would fully lean into it. But against Italy, it stopped feeling theoretical. For stretches, it looked right there in front of everyone. What stood out most was the pace of the decision-making. When this younger group was sharing the floor, the game had a different pulse. The ball did not seem to stick for long. Actions connected faster. The spacing looked more alive. There was less of that feeling where a possession stalls while everyone waits to see who will take control. Instead, the control came from movement itself. One pass led to the next. One attack forced a help rotation, and somebody else was already positioned to punish it. It felt modern. It felt sharp. And maybe most importantly, it felt repeatable. That last part matters. Because a lot of exciting lineups only look great in small bursts. They feed off adrenaline, hit a few shots, and suddenly everybody starts acting like they have discovered the future. Then the next game comes, the shots are not falling, and the magic disappears. This did not feel like that. What made it intriguing was that the structure underneath the highlights looked solid. The reads made sense. The rolls made sense. The pressure points on the floor made sense. It did not feel like a random hot stretch. It felt like a version of basketball that could actually hold up because the strengths fit naturally. That is what makes fans start thinking about eras instead of moments. Once that idea takes hold, you start looking at everything differently. You start seeing not just what happened against Italy, but what it might mean if this becomes the normal version of Team USA. Caitlyn pushing pace and creating early panic. Paige settling the half-court and giving the offense balance. Angel doing the dirty work that turns talent into real pressure. Add shooting around that. Add defensive buy-in. Add more reps, more trust, more comfort. Suddenly, the conversation stops being about whether this group is exciting and starts becoming about how terrifying it could be once it matures. And that is where the win started to feel like a warning. Not just for Italy, but for everyone else watching. Because if this is the early version, the version still figuring things out under a microscope. Then what happens when the chemistry gets even cleaner? What happens when the timing sharpens another level? What happens when the players stop carrying the burden of proving the rumors wrong and just start playing free from the opening tip? Those are the questions that should really make opponents nervous. Not because one game guarantees anything, but because it revealed a ceiling that is impossible to ignore once you have seen it. This is also where the online noise starts looking especially silly. Because the internet was busy trying to force a soap opera out of every glance, while the more important story was sitting right there on the floor. The possibility that Team USA may have stumbled into the exact kind of young core that can carry the program into its next phase. That is a much bigger story than who did or did not dap someone up after one sequence in a previous game. But drama is easy. Future building is harder to talk about because it requires people to actually watch how the pieces fit. Against Italy, the fit was becoming impossible to ignore. And if you are enjoying this breakdown, this is the kind of basketball story we get into all the time here, so subscribing now is probably the easiest way to make sure you do not miss the next one when it drops. What makes this even more fascinating is that the younger core did not just look flashy. It looked connected to winning. That is the key difference. Plenty of star groups can produce highlights. The real test is whether they make the game easier for each other when things get tight. And even though this one turned into a blowout, the clues showed up before the margin got huge. The reads were cleaner. The floor balance was better. The pace had purpose. These were winning details, not just entertaining ones. That is why the blueprint idea started feeling real. Every great team eventually finds a version of itself that makes the most sense. Sometimes it happens slowly. Sometimes it appears in flashes before becoming permanent. But when it appears, you know it because the game suddenly stops looking forced. Players stop feeling like separate stars taking turns and start feeling like parts of one bigger machine. That was the vibe creeping into this performance. Not fully finished, not perfect, not beyond improvement, but clear enough to make people imagine what comes next. And once viewers started imagining what comes next, another player's importance became even harder to ignore. Because as much as Caitlin and Paige naturally draw attention, and as much as the headlines always find Angel, there was something about Angel's role in particular that may have been the hidden engine behind why this all worked as cleanly as it did. Not the loudest part of the machine, maybe, but possibly the part that made the rest of it run. That is the part a lot of people miss when they only look at the stars and the scoring. Angel Reese's impact in a game like this is easy to flatten if you only read the stat line afterward. You can glance at rebounds, points, maybe a couple of hustle plays, and think you have the full picture. But that misses what she actually does to the game when the lineup around her has speed and shot creation. She changes how hard the other team has to work on every possession. She turns loose moments into collisions. She turns ordinary misses into second chances. She turns transition from a possibility into a threat, because the second she secures the ball, the break can start. That matters more than people realize. A team like Team USA does not only need talent with the ball. It needs someone who can create stress without needing the offense built around her every second. That is where Angel becomes so valuable. She can shift the game with force. She can make the paint feel crowded for the other team and freeing for her own. She can absorb contact, screen with purpose, fight for space, and keep possessions alive long enough for the skill around her to punish the defense. That kind of role is not always flashy in the usual superstar way, but it is exactly the kind of role that makes star-heavy groups actually work. And against Italy, you could feel that effect building. Every hard rebound seemed to carry more weight. Every physical battle near the basket chipped away at the other side's comfort. Italy was already trying to survive the pace Caitlin brought and the composure Paige added. Angel made sure they could never fully settle into any of it. Even when she was not the one finishing a play, she was often the reason the defense was under strain to begin with. One hard screen changes the angle. One extra effort rebound creates another rotation. One violent rim run drags help into the lane and opens the weak side. Those are the things that turn a skilled offense into a punishing one. That is why her fit with Caitlin looked so important. A lot of bigs can run the floor. Not all of them run it with timing that actually creates pressure. Angel does. When Caitlin pushes, Angel does not move like a passenger waiting to see what develops. She moves like someone expecting the pass to come if she beats the defense to the right spot. That makes the action real. That makes the defense commit. The same goes for the half-court. A screen only matters if it is set with real intent. A cut only matters if it is made at full conviction. Angel gives those actions force, and Caitlin gives them reward. That is a dangerous combination because it means the defense is under pressure before the shot even exists. And the same thing applies when Paige is on the floor. Paige thrives in clean windows. She thrives when a defender has to think twice or recover from contact or shade too far because the paint feels vulnerable. Angel helps create that environment. She makes help defense harder to time. She makes rebounding responsibilities more stressful. She puts defenders in positions where they cannot completely sell out to stop the perimeter without risking damage inside. That balance is a big reason the lineup did not just look explosive, but stable. It had somebody doing the dirty work that keeps skilled players operating with an edge. This is what people mean when they talk about glue players, except Angel is not some quiet background glue player in the traditional sense. She is much louder than that. More physical, more emotional, more visible. But the function can still be similar. She gives shape to everything around her. She makes certain lineups feel tougher, meaner, and more committed. And when you put that next to high-level creators, it raises the whole unit's pressure level. Suddenly, the game stops being only about talent and starts being about punishment. Can the opponent survive the contact, the pace, the extra possessions, the hard screens, the scramble recoveries, the second and third efforts? Against Italy, the answer kept looking more and more like no. That is also why the chemistry talk missed the bigger point. Even if people wanted drama, the basketball fit was staring them in the face. Angel did not need the game to revolve around her to affect it. She needed timing, trust, and a willingness from the guards to reward effort. She got that. Caitlin did not need everyone to stand still and clear out for her to dominate the tempo. She needed a screener who could hit bodies and a runner who could pressure the rim. She got that. Paige did not need chaos to carve out shots. She needed the defense to be just compromised enough to open the windows she loves. She got that too. When each player gets the environment that suits her best, the whole thing stops feeling forced. And that is when opponents get into real trouble. Because it is one thing to scout a great scorer. It is one thing to plan for a great passer. It is one thing to prepare for a physical rebounder. It is much harder when those traits start feeding each other. Then you are not solving one problem. You are trying to survive a system of problems that keeps renewing itself. One stop does not always end the possession. One good rotation does not always clean up the damage. One moment of balance does not mean the next wave is not already coming. That is the effect Angel helps create. She gives the game a second layer of force that lingers even after the first action is defended. By that point, the final score was almost becoming secondary. Of course, the margin mattered. A blowout over a strong opponent always says something. But by the closing stages, the more important takeaway was what the game had revealed about the group itself. The internet had spent days obsessing over whether this trio could feel natural together. On the floor, the answer looked a lot simpler than the discourse made it seem. They were not just surviving each other. They were starting to unlock each other. And once that becomes visible, the conversation shifts for good. Because then the score no longer feels like the headline. It feels like the evidence. By the end of the night, the score almost felt like the least surprising part. 93-59 is the kind of result that should dominate every headline on its own. It is the kind of margin that usually leaves no room for anything else. But this game was strange in the best way, because the blowout ended up confirming something bigger than simple dominance. It confirmed that an entire week of noise had been built on something flimsy. All the clip reading, all the fake tension, all the confident opinions about chemistry and ego suddenly looked much smaller once the game forced everyone to watch what actually matters. Not theories. Not freeze frames. Possessions. Reads. Timing. Trust. And once you saw those things clearly, the old narrative started falling apart fast. That is what made this performance feel so satisfying to people who were tired of the drama. Team USA did not need a press conference to shut the rumors down. The players did not need to deliver some overly polished speech about unity. They just had to play. And the more they played, the more obvious it became that the internet had spent days inflating ordinary moments into some giant soap opera. That is the danger of modern sports coverage. A tiny clip gets detached from context, people bring their favorite biases to it, and suddenly the conversation becomes about storylines that feel dramatic instead of realities that can actually be seen on the court. This game pushed back on that in the strongest possible way. Not by being perfect from the opening tip. That is what made it more believable. Team USA had its uneven start. It had its tense early possessions. It looked human first. But once the game opened up, the truth showed up with it. Caitlin changed the temperature. Angel made the physical side of the game impossible to ignore. Paige gave the whole thing control. And the more those pieces worked together, the less room there was for all the old talking points. By the fourth quarter, it was hard to even remember why people were so desperate to force the rivalry angle in the first place. Because what you were watching was not rivalry. It was alignment. Not the finished version of it, not some flawless final product that will never have rough stretches again, but real alignment. The kind that matters in serious basketball. Players recognizing what each other do well. Players feeding those strengths instead of competing with them. Players making the next read without overthinking who gets the shine. That is what made the game feel important. It was not just a blowout over Italy. It was a glimpse of what Team USA looks like when the noise fades just enough for the basketball to breathe. And once that happened, the future became the more interesting story. Because now the question is not whether these players can share the floor. We saw that. The better question is how dangerous they become with more time, more reps, and more trust. How dangerous does Caitlin look when the pace becomes second nature for everyone around her? How dangerous is Paige when the defense has already been stretched before she even attacks? How punishing does Angel become when the chemistry around her makes every rebound, every screen, and every rim run hit twice as hard? Those are the questions opponents should be losing sleep over, because they are basketball questions, not internet questions. And basketball questions are always the ones that last. The internet will move on to another clip, another theory, another piece of fake drama by next week. That part never stops. But games like this leave something behind. They reset the conversation. They remind people that not every story deserves to survive contact with real competition. Some stories only live online because they were never strong enough to survive 40 actual minutes. Italy gave Team USA a real test, and instead of exposing hidden fractures, the game ended up exposing how exaggerated the whole controversy had been.